All right, let me share my screen. Okay, so, well, thank you for the introduction, Luciano. Welcome, everyone. Today, as Luciano said, we're going to talk about high-quality online deliberation using hybrid intelligence. But, me and my colleague Michiel. But, well, this title sounds pretty boring, and it's just after lunch. So let me start off instead with a bit more of a clickbait title. And let me start with the title instead of social media are bad. You probably have heard about this. You probably, are on social media. You know how bad they are. Probably even your mom told you that social media are bad. But today, we want to try to give you a little bit of a different angle, explain you another way in which social media are bad. Social media are bad to read the wisdom of the crowd. So the wisdom of the crowd is essentially the opposite of the expert's opinion, as in it is what lay people or the group of lay people thinks about a certain topic. For example, if we talk about lockdown measures, as you may be familiar with, there is on one side there is the expert's opinion, and on the other side there is the wisdom of the crowd, what the population, what the citizens think about it. Now, three key components for having a true, real, proper reading of the wisdom of the crowd are diversity, equality, and independence. And none of these is actually present on social media. So let me quickly go through it. So diversity means that the population needs to be, well, diverse. The name says it. There needs to be different people with different backgrounds, with different opinions. And this is not present on social networks because social networks create the so-called filter bubbles. You may be aware of that. Essentially, social networks, friend suggestions and algorithm suggest friends that have similar interests to yours, and that means that around you create a local network of contacts that share similar interests, and that means that diversity is actually low. There's no equality. Equality means that everybody's voice has the same weight. And this thing is also not present on social media because you have influencers. You have people who have lots of contacts whose voice is heard much more than other people with way fewer contacts. And last, independence. Independence on social media is more of a social dynamic that happens so independence means that our voice should not be biased by anybody else's voice. And this doesn't happen also on social media because what typically happens, also according to several experiments, is that what we write, what we say on social media is actually biased by what has been said so far, for example, on comments, because we want to try to fit in the crowd. We don't want to stay out of the centers, out of the bias. So not only these three factors are not present on social media, but the main point is that these three factors are actually discouraged on social media. They're actually not promoted on social media. And this means that reading social media to get a feeling of what a population thinks about a certain topic is not really the best way. So what is the best way then? Well, the best way, you may think about voting, you may think about referenda, but according to us, the best way is deliberation. So deliberation happens when a group of people sits virtually or physically around the table and discusses a certain topic with the idea that people have to give arguments in favor or against certain opinions or certain decisions by rationally thinking about it. So participants are invited to rationally think about their argument, to rationally think about other participants' arguments, with the final goal of essentially making a common decision, or at least having a proper rational discussion about a certain topic. Now, deliberation in particular, by the way in which it is conducted, emphasizes content creation. Everybody is pushed to say what they think. It emphasizes reasoning. Everybody is pushed to reason about what they think and to properly structure their arguments and not just throw things over there. And then it emphasizes also inclusivity, meaning that these deliberation groups are typically done, at least according to theory, they are done in a very diverse way where all types of backgrounds are involved and asked to give their opinion. Social media essentially promotes exactly the opposite. Social media promotes clicks, right? So content consumption, sensational contents, and these local networks where sort of create an echo chamber for this sensational content. So, the point is that deliberation sounds very good, right? Sounds like on paper, sounds very good. But deliberation is not just on paper. Deliberation is not just what you think that ancient Greece looked like, but deliberation is actually used also in the modern society. You may be aware that a couple of years ago, abortion was legalized in Ireland, and but the policymakers were a little bit unsure whether to propose the referendum for legalizing abortion because of the conservatism of the Irish society. So in order to investigate whether it was the right moment to propose such a referendum, they created deliberation groups. So they invited citizens with diverse backgrounds to discuss together, to put out their arguments, to get informed also during the process, obviously, about abortion, about the pros and the cons. And after these sessions of deliberation, the Irish government essentially felt motivated and felt justified in proposing this referendum. The referendum passed with a resounding yes. Abortion was legalized, and by asking it during the exit polls, citizens were well aware about what happened, and the fact that this deliberation had happened pushed them to inform themselves about the deliberations and about abortion. So this created, on one hand, it created, let's say, a justification for the actions of the policymakers, but on the other hand, it created more information and more empowerment in the citizens, because they felt that their voice could really be heard and that the government did something because they heard the voice of the citizens. So this is at the basis of deliberative democracy. It's I'm not going to go here in details about that, but it's this idea of hearing the voice of the people and at the same time having people feeling empowered and informed is very, very important. However, what has been done in Ireland, especially, was with just a few hundred, maybe 1,000 participants, but not more than that. In order to really have proper deliberation, according to us, almost all the population should be involved. As many participants as possible should be involved, so that all voices, literally all voices, can be heard. But that is very difficult to do, of course, when you have these physical deliberations. You cannot ask millions of people to physically participate to these deliberations. So how do we take what's good in deliberation and scale it up to a population-wide sample? Well, my colleague is going to answer this question.
Yeah, let me take over the slides then. All right, you guys should be able to see my presentation now. Here we go. All right, yeah, so we talked a little bit about deliberation and about, so we want to scale it up, right? What we exactly mean with scaling we'll get to in a minute. But we have a couple of ideas on how to get there. And we're also inspired by some of the things that do work well on social media. As I will also later show, not all social media is bad. To kind of contradict the the clickbait title, perhaps. And to make it a little bit more concrete is that we're talking about e-deliberation that is AI supported and text based. So those are the three things that you see here on your screen. So first off, we'd like to use AI in some sort of way. We think AI provides us with a prime tool to kind of help us scale up the deliberation to more participants, making sure that everyone is included and that these deliberative ideals, as we saw with that are required for the wisdom of the crowd, for instance, that they are preserved. So online, for instance, like Enrico said, it removes this restriction to physically come together, but also having a video call with like 1 million people is not a really good idea. So you should have a different way of communicating. And for this, we make the assumption of making it text-based. You could say also for discussions, you do want to have it face-to-face. There is, of course, a difference. But even on social media, as it is now, there is already a discussion happening, right? And there is already some sort of discussion going on. So we're looking to kind of amplify that and insert some deliberative qualities into that discussion and take it from there. All right, so we talked about scaling. And, us as a computer scientists, when we talk about scaling, we talk about compute power. So when we talk about scaling up, we say, all right, I'm going to trade in my little computer for a bigger computer. Or we talk about scaling out, which is actually buying more computers. But in a deliberation, we have a slightly different way of talking about it. So in a deliberation, we kind of, when we say scaling up, we mean we add more participants to a single deliberation. So first there's, where's my mouse? First there's 2 guys talking, then there's a couple of guys talking, and eventually there's the entire group. Well, I don't know how many people there are, but like 10 or something, but we would like to increase this to, I don't know, 1,000 or above, Of course, when you do this, a couple of problems pop up. So deliberation should be on a specific topic, or it should discuss a specific problem. Like the case in Ireland, it was abortion. As soon as you increase the number of participants, you become, if you have ever been part of an internet discussion, you might run into the problem that people tend to go off topic. So it's really a problem that you should force people to actually discuss the matter that is at hand. And the other problem is that, well, actually, as a single person in this deliberation, you don't get the feeling that you're heard anymore. You don't get the feeling that you're whatever you put out there is having an impact, which is something that we would like to prevent. So that was scaling up, and the scaling out is actually, besides adding more participants to a single deliberation, is having more deliberations. So this way we can address multiple topics. You can have one deliberation in the morning, and a deliberation at lunch, and a deliberation in the afternoon, with a bunch of different people. But of course, as you're having more deliberations, it becomes increasingly difficult to keep track of, what arguments was I using there, and how far along in the discussion was I in another deliberation. So it becomes really difficult to keep track of where you're at. And also this scaling out. Again, it shows a really big problem with physical and synchronous deliberations, right? So you can no longer organize so many deliberations all the time that are happening somewhere. You need some kind of online platform to do this. All right. So next up, we were thinking about, okay, so in scaling up this deliberation, what are the steps that we need to take to help humans? So how do we inform them? How do we, help actively produce something that they can use in this deliberation? And the first problem that we are starting to address is the recording of progress. So like I just said, keeping track of where you are or where you have left off in a certain deliberation, or where others have left off for you to continue with, is kind of a key component of our approach. And furthermore, once you have this record of progress, you can also use this record to do other things like the analysis of the content that there is, or some kind of meta-analysis of the progress that is being made. It could also potentially help with external communication. So let's say you have a bunch of meetings during the day and you need to provide a report of those meetings to a supervisor. You basically look back through the records that you have, which are ideally automatically summarized for you, as based on the minutes that are there. So this is the type of thing that we envision to be there. And ideally, this should be automated and should potentially also be personalized. So personalized in this case means, how do I, for a specific person, what is the most beneficial way to help that person? And we'll come to a small example, or we'll discuss this further a little bit when we're talking about values in Enrico's part again. And lastly, there's the case of facilitation or moderation in the deliberation. Like I also mentioned before, the people tend to get off topic when there's a lot of people participating in the discussion. So you need a method for keeping people on topic, or asking people who did not have their say yet, or some way to kind of bring everyone around the table and make sure that everyone is participating. It's also in some ways you need to kind of facilitate or moderate this. And yeah, so we kind of in the broad scheme of things, we think of these as a couple of steps that could help people in the deliberation. But really, as a core component, is this recording of progress, and we do that through the deliberation map, as we call it. And so next to this being a record of progress, it is also, in the future, we would like to be able to reason over it. So these meta-analyses that I talked about, so we would like to also include those from there. I should point out, so the deliberation map is a map, so it's basically containing content that is deliberative. And what is nice is that the deliberative content should be reasoned. So it should contain arguments, and it should contain problems that people address, and it should contain the way they think about it. And that's really the kind of strength that we're striving towards. So we're trying to make use of these ideals that there are in deliberation for structuring a discussion that's going on. And ideally, we would like to do so autonomously. But we'll see if we get there. Yeah, so of course, we're not the first. So there's some examples of these deliberation maps or deliberation approaches. So right now you're looking at one. This is the Deliberatorium from Mark Klein. And it's a little bit overwhelming because there's a lot of buttons and a lot of stuff going on. But what is really nice about the example, what I wanted to show you, is that it's focused around finding pros and cons. So it's focused around representing the the key points or the key content that is being discussed here. And then there's a bunch of options like voting or inserting new IDs, so it's really, really difficult to navigate, and it's really hard also at a first glance to kind of see what is over there. But I can tell you that the content that is in here is really nice. So the content in here is really, really well structured. So, I mean, social media is not all that bad, because what social media is good at is kind of providing an intuitive way to interact with other people, right? I mean, everyone has used Twitter. Even difficult things like communicating in reply threads and kind of traversing this tree. It is quite difficult, but people still manage. And actually, people tend to produce pretty intricate reply structures, like one person replying to another, and then another person replying to him. Well, you see people here, they tend to get sidetracked in the entire different conversation almost. But it shows that discussions are happening. And even these discussions, you can kind of map them out. But what it doesn't show you is the content that is there, right? So you don't know, what these people are talking about. You don't know why they're disconnected from other people. What problems are they raising? What arguments are they making? So this is largely still not found out yet. And that is the type of information that we would like to actually contain in our deliberation map. So now that we kind of saw what we want from this deliberation map, we were thinking, okay, so we need a method to fill this. We need a method to fill a deliberation map. And I talked before also about it being autonomous, but there's also a nice part that I can say now, which is about hybrid intelligence. So both Enrico and I, we are connected to the Hybrid Intelligence Center, which is also Luciano talked about it, the Zwaartekracht grant from NWO. And as a motto, they have augmenting human intellect. So it's really not about replacing humans, but it's about working alongside humans, using AI as a partner to kind of increase what humans can do. So take the best from humans, take the best from computers, and really bring them together to move forward. And why? I mean, for me, at least, the why is really, really obvious, because there's the promise that it's both better for efficiency, so you're both able to faster come to more accurate decisions that are made, combining the two strengths, the computational strength and the intuitive human side of things. But next to it, there's also trust. So once you have especially when you're in a discussion, you want to be able to use a platform that you can trust. And especially if there's autonomously, your ideas are kind of mapped for you in some kind of structure, you need to make sure that you have some kind of control over it, but you also trust that the AI is doing what you want it to do. Well, HI provides some kind of way to structure this, to reason about it, and it does so through 4 different research pillars, which are the CARE pillars. So CARE stands for collaborative, adaptive, responsible, and explainable. And I would like to highlight, for instance, explainable. So you could say, well, explainability, what does it mean? It means that an AI algorithm has to explain why it came up with a certain decision. So why did you use my argument, and why did you insert it here at this point in the map? Well, we would actually like to also show that entire process of the AI making that choice. So you would be able to kind of verify and trust what is going on there. Yeah, so and on top of that, it also again provides a feedback loop to the human. So you would be able to kind of look at that process. So why did the AI think I meant to say the argument that I was making there? So what did the AI think of that, and kind of reinforce your own idea of what you're saying. Yeah, so I think at this point is where we have. Oh wait, yeah. So almost. So we talked about how to help the scaling up of a deliberation, how to help people in making sure that we can scale up, right? Some of the examples of the deliberation map in itself and the method that we wish to use, but we didn't talk about what we want the deliberation map to contain. But before we go there, I think we will take some time to take a couple of questions if there are any.
Great. Thanks, Michiel, so far. Thanks, Enrico. Yeah, do we have questions? Please, you can raise your hand here on virtually speaking. So that, yeah. Okay, we have one. Yuval? Okay, please correct me if I'm pronouncing your name wrong. So, but you have the floor if you want to turn on your camera, if you want, or just speak. Please.
Sure. Hi, thanks for the talk. I'm Ujjwal Kataraju from the Web Information Systems. What was a little unclear to me was about what goal you were trying to optimize for. So I understand different needs that deliberation can generally serve. I was wondering whether you're trying to optimize for, say, a deliberation that can inform policy change, for example, or is it the process of deliberation itself that you're looking at? And I think this is a pertinent question because this would then determine what the metrics that would evaluate your framework would be, right? Could you say something about that?
Yeah, so I like the mathematical approach of this question. So we do not have yet any optimization in mind. The idea is to build a platform that allows for tools for moderation tools, for example, that can be then employed and optimized for different purposes. So one can be, for example, to increase participation, so to make sure that all users give their opinion. One could be to increase diversity of read opinions. So it could be, for example, exposing participants to something that is actually opposite to what they believe in, to see how this could increase their, for example, acceptance or their belief in different opinions. So we do not have anything specific in mind, but as I said, the idea is to create the tools for then optimizing as you prefer.
Okay, so while you're building if I may just follow up very quickly. So while you're building these tools, right, you, as you mentioned, you probably would want to support certain functionalities which are hard to achieve in their absence. You just mentioned how providing a voice for every participant is one of those aspects. So I think eventually that's essentially what you would want to evaluate, right, to check whether your proposed solution is effective or not. so I guess you have a handful of ideals, as you called them earlier, that you would look at. So is that what you would eventually evaluate then?
Yeah, those are part of this kind of toolbox, as Enrico puts it, right? So there's there's also a number of theories of these, yeah, like we said, these deliberative ideals. So there's a bunch of them, and different. Also, when discussing this platform, there's different kind of design characteristics that you can employ, and that have a different impact on each of these ideals, right? And what is also unclear is the interaction between them. So what if I increase the strictness of moderation? How does it affect all of these different ideals that are there? So that interaction is completely unknown. So this is because it's relatively new, and especially to do this online, is people don't know about it yet. But it would be nice to kind of we're starting to build this from the ground up, and as we go along, we'd like to put some prods and make some experiments here and there to kind of see, to get a feel for what the interaction would be like.
Sure.
And that is the main idea. Yeah.
That's interesting. If one final comment, just to share this view with you and then get out of here to let others get a chance as well. So in our group, we're working a little bit on trying to understand collective action as well in crowd computing communities. So think of online labor, Mechanical Turk, so on and so forth. And I think you could probably rely on such platforms to try and understand team dynamics and perhaps some of the other ideals that you can quickly operationalize into an experimental framework. To try and understand how different features that you might want to build within tools can actually play a role in bringing these ideals to the fore within your deliberation. We can chat offline more about this, but yeah,
definitely. Yeah, definitely. Just send us an email. We should definitely talk about that.
Cool. Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, super interesting discussion. Thanks, Eva. Ru, you have a question. You wanna?
Yes, yeah, it's kind of in line with Uyewal's questions and recommendations. I think I got a little bit lost towards the end to what the actual problems are that you're trying to address. And I have a better idea now after your answers to Uyewal. So it's a really fascinating project that you're setting up. But I would really like, maybe the question would be like, what's like a really small practical problem that you think is possible to solve, or that's maybe that you would typically do like in a physical presence with a group of people, and how would you translate that to an online environment? And then plus one on what we all said about that there's lots of experimenting going on. There are like really interesting communities like the Mechanical Turk workers. There's a couple of people there that I could also put you in touch with that have been doing this kind of work for a long time, like how to organize workers online and make sure that they can align on certain issues in a fairly distributed way. So that's, I guess, my question for you. Like, I'm happy to help there offline, but my question is like, do you have a couple of like really practical small problems in mind, or is that maybe a next step for your research?
I mean, that is what we'll get to in the second part of our presentation as well. So thanks for the question, because it nicely gives us a segue maybe. But so we kind of viewed this as or at least as how I understand it, is we kind of took a couple of these ideals and we kind of zoomed in on them. And for instance, what I'm zooming in on is, so I put it down here as perspectives. But what it's really about is about arguments. So I'm really looking closely about the reasoning that people do. What arguments are they raising? Also kind of looking at what is available in AI, right? So how far along is natural language processing? How far along is argument mining? To what degree can we use what is there reliably? And but that's really zooming in on only like one of these ideals. So that's just zooming in on reasoning. So for me, that is how I make it practical and how I kind of tend to scope it off. I don't know about if Enrico has a similar.
Yeah, I think to answer your question, one practical idea that we have is, for example, what happens if we create live this deliberation map how does this, and the participants can see this deliberation map containing the arguments that are put pro or against a certain topic of discussion. How does this influence the discussion? Is the discussion going to, for example, converge and have less repetitions simply? Is it going to actually produce more arguments simply because there's no repetition? So this, for example, a simple first step. And what me and Michiel especially work on is the creation of this deliberation map. So how do we create this in autonomous hybrid intelligence ways?
All right, thanks. Yeah, I think like what might help is to maybe because I think there are plenty of organizations, well, a lot of online deliberation, of course, happens on social media platforms, or we don't really have access to understand how they don't do much of it, and there's not a lot of collaboration. But it might be interesting to see if there are also policymakers who are thinking about what we want to see, and that might be a good way to kind of put emphasis on, because these are very practical, very urgent questions, but they're super scientific as well, because it's never been done before. So that's just encouragement is to see if you can seek maybe partnerships, because you're setting it up as a big thing. Like try to find partners who can help you kind of make it more specific, because it will still be a highly scientific endeavor. Right.
Yeah,
thanks.
we are collaborating with Nick Mauter and the PVE people, participatory value evaluation. So we're using their data, we're helping them, and then us, Luciano included, have ideas to make them scale long. I'm not sure which direction of scaling this would be, but anyway, so we're already working with them, and we can talk also. We can go in details about those ideas.
It's indeed a challenge, right? How to combine the level of abstraction that you can allow you to generalize and face different projects, but at the same time be concrete to have some more down to earth kind of solutions. It's always challenging. And I had a question for you myself, but I will keep it to the end, because I think that's a very smooth transition for you. So I think maybe you can continue with the slides, and then we can open up for questions again later on.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So back to our deliberation map and the content we want to store inside of it. So there's two things that Enrico and I are working on. So the first is perspectives. That's the title of my research. And the second one is our personal values. And Enrico will tell you later more about the second one. But first, a little bit about perspectives. So the word in itself, perspective, it has many interpretations, but the one that I choose to use here is the one of perspective taking. So the actively contemplating other psychological experiences. So informally, it's like putting on your social glasses and kind of look at the discussion, actively place yourself in another person's mindset and look at how that person might be viewing the discussion, or might be kind of weighing off its options. So this perspective taking is a significant mental effort, but it has been shown to increase reciprocity and empathy and all these. Again, so these relate back to the deliberative ideals that there are. If you get everyone to do this, and also to make sure that they provide their own perspective, so people should really be not really forced, but encouraged to provide their perspective on the topic that's being discussed. You will start to find these problems and criteria and solutions that you didn't know about beforehand. So these specifically, one thing that Enrico mentioned was this independence, so that you look at what the other people think before you give your opinion, and you adjust your opinion a little bit related to what the other people think. But if you're one step ahead of that, you will find out what these criteria are that people actually worry about privately, and it's highly related to the reasoning ideal. So in also providing their perspective, these people, they should be to a high degree providing arguments and providing why are they making conclusions, and specify all of this. And the way we then look for these perspectives, or how I plan to look for these perspectives, is basically by asking who says what. And the what in this case are arguments. So I'm trying to make it really concrete, where arguments are kind of the reason for having a certain opinion. And you would think maybe this is easy, but actually it's not. So in the simple case, a person is perfectly straightforward in giving his or her argument, but in reality it's really complex. There's a lot of implicit information also being captured in the arguments. Here there's for the first two lines. So any doctor who tells an individual patient that all vaccines are safe and effective is lazily parroting the CDC. So in this, especially in the words lazily parroting, right? So there's an implicit meaning that a computer might not be able to tell kind of right off the bat. But next to this implicit meaning, just even finding the arguments and finding the entailment between arguments and conclusion and finding their interaction is already really difficult. So so that is kind of what for now what I'm focusing on, and also what I answered to Roel is I'm kind of taking this reasoning ideal and trying to zoom in on it and really try to get to the core problem that is there and see how far along AI is, and see whether we can actually use that in the broader scope of deliberation. So this is about the what. So next up, there's also the who. So the who is it's related. So who is having the argument? Who is stating it? What other parties or stakeholders are they mentioning? So I highlight here the other stakeholders that are being mentioned. You get into complicated cases where there's also embedded evidence or embedded statements, or this very epistemological kind of logical, like what you think that he says kind of cases. So it's a really complex topic, but I'm trying to I can, if there are questions, I can go into a little bit more detail, but I try to keep it on a high level for now. Yeah, so when it boils down to it, it's a very linguistical challenge. And also, before, we also wish to use HI for this, so make it hybrid. So really rely on the human intuition to make the decision where it matters, but also employ AI for the straightforward computations. Yes, Enrico, yep. I think you're up next.
I can just share again.
Yes.
All right, so perspectives are who says what, and values are why do people say something, to keep it simple. So values are the abstract drivers that are behind our opinions and our actions and our beliefs. So what you see over here on the right is an example of personal values, and this is an example of basic values. So these values are general values that have been found throughout the research, and essentially these are the motivations for our opinions, for our actions. But as you can see here, these values, at least we believe that these values are a little bit too general, a little bit too generic, such as self-direction or achievement, and they are very difficult to connect to everyday situations. And that is why we want instead to use context-specific values. So context-specific values are instead sort of the other side of the coin, and they are defined within a context and applicable to a context. Let me make a couple of examples. So let's take the example of physical safety. This value is very important in the context of lockdown measures, because people take actions based on the motivation, based on the driver of physical safety, as opposed to others who, for example, do it based on freedom. So it is a value that is applicable to the context of lockdown measures, but it is, for example, not applicable to the context of regulating financial markets, arguably. However, the very same value of physical safety can take different forms in different contexts. So let's say that if we talk about physical safety in the context of lockdown measures, then we talk about maintaining distance, we talk about wearing face masks. But if we talk about the same value, physical safety, in the context of driving, then we think about wearing safety belts, we think about respecting speed limits and signs. Now, these two are essentially, from an abstract point of view, they're the same value, but they take different flavors, different forms in different contexts. And if we want to concretely talk, or if we want to concretely design and talk about a specific value in a specific context, well, we believe that we should use the context-specific value. So let's make, for example, if we want to create an agent that throughout your day helps you in increasing your physical safety, well, that agent should not suggest you to wear a face mask while you're driving in order to increase your physical safety. That would not make sense. The agent needs to understand the context where the value is located in, and that these values are different. So, well, the problem is that if we talk about the context-specific values, the first step is then, well, finding out which values are relevant to a specific context when we're talking. And in order to do this, this was the first step of my PhD. Me, Michiel, Luciano, and some other colleagues developed a methodology, a hybrid intelligence methodology for identifying the values that are relevant to a specific context. So essentially using human intuition and supported by artificial intelligence. I'm not going to go in detail, but you can contact me for additional details. And once we have identified which values are relevant to a context, we can use those values essentially as a language, as a language of communication to interpret what people are saying or are trying to say. So instead of having deliberation participants communicate through their text, purely through their text, we can sort of filter this text, and using a transparent box, I'll get to that in a moment, we can instead, to the listeners, we can give the comment that the actual person gave and the perspective, the values that that person holds with that comment. The idea is that if we give a better interpretation of what people are saying or are trying to say, on the listener side, hopefully there's going to be a better understanding of different opinion, and there's going to be a calmer discussion instead of just, rushing to thinking that, well, that person must be stupid because, well, she thinks differently from me, so she must be stupid. So hopefully if we give a better detailing of what is said in this additional abstract level, like perspective, well, some more concrete perspective and abstract values levels, there will be a better understanding of this conversation. And as Michiel mentioned earlier, all of this should be done in a transparent manner. This algorithm that interprets these comments, that finds the perspectives and finds the values, should be as transparent as possible. Users, participants should have control over what the algorithm thinks about what they say. In this way, if they have some meaningful control over this algorithm, they will build trust in it, and they will be able to sort of use this platform to discuss and hopefully have a better informed and civilized discussion about topics. So essentially, this is one of our final goals, to attach to one of the questions from earlier. And well, we're going to get there at a certain point. So that was the presentation. And yeah, just ask some more questions. Luciano, you said you had one.
Cool. So thanks, Enrico. Thanks, Michiel. That was really interesting. And yeah, let me just add one comment, a small comment before that. This work he mentioned was really, so on it's called Axis, right? It was accepted for AMAS 2021. And it deals like with two different contexts. One of the contexts of energy transition, and another one of the relaxation of COVID measures, together with the group from Nick Malter, some other people at the TPM on the participatory value evaluation. So definitely, as soon as out, I recommend. It's interesting. And we are also trying to understand not which are the values. And there's another work we are also trying to see how much each individual care about each value. So a little bit weird something. So on my question is, you mentioned early in the presentation about deliberation as being a way of rational discussion. So to bring rational arguments, but it comes with like, we are messy, let's not call irrational, but at least boundedly rational human beings. And I just want to say, how do you have some ideas to reconcile this? Because if you want to see only rational arguments, but we are not always rational on the way we propose our arguments. There's a lot of emotions, there are feelings, there maybe the connection even to values that we can say, is that really rational or not? So just, do you have some ideas on that aspect?
Yeah, so I mean, this filling of the deliberation map, right? So we gave perspectives and values now as a kind of way to fill it, but those are kind of examples, maybe perhaps, of things that you could put in this map. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to get to a point where we can say, all right, so the technology that we employ here, or the AI or HI, or however you extract the perspectives or values, we get it to a point where we can work with it and we can kind of on a high level use it for helping people in a deliberation. But next to it, there might be many more. There might be many other types of information that you can extract. Things like sentiment, things like emotion, things like, all these different aspects of what people are saying. You could, I mean, for now, also the idea that we have for the representation of this map, it allows for these different types of information to be included and actually persist next to the perspectives and values that we mentioned for now. And I mean, while I'm looking at, so I mean, you're right in saying, well, I'm trying to look at this rationality, and I'm kind of saying, well, it's I'm hoping it's going to be a self-reinforcing loop, right? So I'm trying to look at deliberation as there should be a rational discussion going on. So I then present to you the rational discussion should become even more rational, right? But it doesn't mean that I kind of ignore all the other stuff that is there. But it's just one way of scoping off the project for now. But if it turns out that it's really difficult to do, or I kind of lose people during the process, then you need to critically look and say, well, maybe the rationality constraints that we have for now are too strict. So let's broaden up a little bit. Let's maybe go one step lower in trying to model it, or trying to extract what people think or how they think. And maybe shift a little bit in what we exactly mean with a perspective, for instance.
Yeah. Okay. Nice, Michiel. Thank you very much. I think that clarifies a lot. And I mean, I do believe that this combination of human and AI, that is really the way to go for this kind of topics and issues, that you can still have the goal of achieving rationality, but still including everyone along the way, right? Okay. Does someone have any questions right now? Can you raise your hands, please? Ben, you suggested here in the chat an article for Enrico. I don't know if you want to just make a quick comment about that.
Yeah, I could say why I thought of it. Hi, thanks for the presentations. Very fascinating. I was thinking when you mentioned black to transparent, that that was a sort of, I think you used the words in terms of just being able to tell what the algorithms are doing, but I'm sort of sensitive to also the sense of maybe the perspectives from which we're trying to, or the tech is trying to understand the values. And I think how we understand what values are in a situation is affected by the implicit values in how we're looking. And there's probably some care over notions like transparency, that we don't suddenly think that we have actual descriptions or transparent or white descriptions of the values, but there's some kind of essential ignorance still within the overall situation. Yeah, so I just suggested, I thought that paper sort of talks about black and white boxes in a really nice way, and I thought it might be relevant to the sort of bigger picture you're trying to deal with.
Yeah. Thank you, absolutely. Yeah, just to quickly mention, so what we tried to do, for example, in the first, in our first project, to identify which values were relevant to a discussion. So to give an example of how we tried to, let's say, have humans in the decision-making power. So the idea that we had was to, we took answers to a survey, as Luciano said, 2 surveys, one about energy transition, one about lockdown measures. And we tried to guide human annotators, so mostly they were policy experts or value experts, to guide them through this data set and try to find the values in what people wrote. So we had some guidelines and tried to invite them to see values only in what they wrote, what the participants wrote, instead of just coming up with these values on their own. So sort of what this means is that we can ultimately, let's say, also trace back these values from what people had written originally in this survey. And that should somehow give a little bit more of a transparency and at least making it grounded in data, and where data is what actual people had written. So this is just an example, but anyway, yeah. Anyway, it's tough to make transparent boxes.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think that the kind of being able to kind of trace the process is really valuable like that. That sounds like I think there could be there might be different ways that process happens, and it might be interesting to compare those. So the different ways that values get read would be an interesting topic.
Yeah.
Okay. So Ben, thank you very much for sharing. I think that's looks also an interesting reference, and not for me, I believe for some others also here in this meeting, in this talk. So do we have more questions? Marcos, please go ahead.
Hey, hello. Sorry for not turning on my camera. I don't know, it just don't work.
No problem.
Okay. I was thinking when you were talking about context-specific personal values, and taking this into account, and if you are considering that some collective decisions, they need to match diverse deliberations, not very much just help every person or group to deliberate or create a consensus, or that calls for every specific deliberations, but showing how different group deliberations can be matched together to make a collective decision. I don't know if you get what I'm trying to say.
Not really.
Okay. Well, I always give this example. When you're designing a neighborhood, for example, a lot of people have different desires. You have to match all those desires, most as you can, for designing this neighborhood, for example. So it's more than just giving people what are all those values involved and the context of every value, but the final decision needs the match of those. And it's different from a consensus. It's not a consensus of what is better for all or something like this, but to show people that they can be matched in a way, and I think this artificial intelligence can help maybe. And when you talked about specific content values and showing this, I think this maybe can get in, like this specific way of helping collective decisions. That's why I'm posting this.
Yeah. No, yeah, absolutely. That's also why we think like, Nick Mauter and all those, the people behind the participatory value evaluation. That's essentially what you're talking about in a way. So the idea is to instead of take what people would prefer, it's like the policy options that they would prefer, or for example, how they would prefer to relax lockdown measures. Instead of reading those, they read the values that people, the reason why people would like to relax certain policy measures. And this is much more informative to the policymakers, especially because, especially in the situations where things change rapidly, like, well, in Corona. So understanding the values behind people's decisions helps. So that's, and also essentially you would, instead of aggregating for preferences, you would aggregate for values, and that would be very helpful for a.
Sorry.
Okay. That would be very helpful for a moderator or policymaker or neighborhood designer.
Thank you very much.
Great. So I think we ran out of time, so we are almost running out of time. So I think I would like to thanks Enrico, thanks Michiel for the very interesting talk, and thanks everyone for joining us, and see some of you again next week. So
All right, thank you.
And feel free to contact us personally for any kind of questions. Really, we're open to discuss.